Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is session 11 of MOOC 13. As you can see, we have a switch in scenery. I was getting set up on the balcony, and then I thought it might actually rain. So I ran back inside. I did not want to get cut off in the middle because I'm running through the house to get out of the rain. Hope everyone's doing okay with the COVID lockdowns. We are on day 22 here at the University of Nicosia. And we are announcing in a few minutes that we're going to complete the whole semester online, including labs, including final examinations, or more strictly speaking, complete the whole semester remotely. Some things might be final examinations, there might be other forms of assessment. So we've concluded that at least through early June, we're going to operate in this mode. So it's super interesting. We're still pretty busy, but I think we're settling into a more normal routine now with the full university, all programs online. And so I hope all of you are also doing well and you're keeping safe and you and your families are keeping safe. So today we have some questions about innovation that I will try and answer. And then if we have some time, we can chit chat on some other topics. But I want to answer the innovation questions first. Sorry, I'll answer there. I see 3 unique questions in the chat. Let me answer those now. How are faculty coping? I think they're doing okay. A lot of our faculty used to teach anyway on the online programs. So for them, it wasn't a big shift. Some faculty did not teach on online programs. For them, it was a little bit of a shift. And some faculty that probably thought they would never teach online. It's been a very interesting new experience for them. And so I think they're doing okay. Graduation, we will not be having the graduation ceremony in June. We will, we believe, be rescheduling it, but we don't have a date yet. So I think it's too early to say what the date is for our new graduation ceremony. But our intention is to have one. But our intention is to have one once everything has gotten to a point where people can make their plans to attend and their families can come to attend. And so it would be difficult, I think, to set a date right now when people can't decide, can't make any plans. The airports are closed. There's a variety of travel restrictions and so on. On the third question, the unique baseball cap. Normally I would say you can get it from the campus store, but that's obviously not very helpful since you're all online and the campus store is currently closed. We had been planning to make an online store, and this might be an opportunity to do that so people can pick up caps from around the world, because I don't think we'll be picking it up in the next couple of months from Cyprus anytime soon. So that's where we are on unique logistics. So let me go to the questions. The first question is a very good one. It's a question that I sometimes have myself. When I think about this, which is, what's the difference between incremental and sustaining innovation? They look pretty similar. And the question is, the exact question is, I could perhaps understand the difference between process and product innovation. Please explain the difference between these types of innovations and why we should be able to differentiate between them. Then there's a follow-up question. I was trying to relate these concepts too. I wanted to share my thoughts on the innovation you've mentioned here, incremental versus sustaining. I feel the difference lies in the context in the context of impact on the market. In incremental innovation, it contains continuous improvements in products, services, and such innovations have a very low impact on the market, whereas in sustaining, there is a significant improvement which has more impact on the market than the incremental innovation. Meanwhile, the relationship between the dimensions of innovation and types of innovation is all these dimensions can cover different innovation types, incremental, radical, etc. If I'm doing a product innovation, I might go for an incremental or disruptive innovation, waiting for the live QA for better clarification. Well, actually that's a pretty good clarification. This similar to my understanding. I think the thing that's the same between incremental and sustaining is the following, that the market approach, the customer, the market structure, where value is being created, where in the supply chain value is being created, where in the product offering value is being created, the business model, as strategists like to say, remains the same. So if you are in either of these two buckets, I think there is not a fundamental rethinking of the relationship between the different parties, the customers, the competitors, the other adjacent industries, and so on. So I think that's the same between the two of them. And then how I think about it, which I think is a little bit casual, but it makes sense to me, I think, a little bit from my operating roles. Incremental is like your day-to-day items. I mean, yes, they're innovations, but it's also kind of doing your job, right? Like, if you're doing your job, you are. I mean, the alternative to incremental innovation is literally your product stays the same forever, with no new features, no new developments, and so on. And so it feels to me like it's the minimum one can do, and it certainly is. It doesn't change your competitive position between you and your competitors. Sustaining innovation is, I think, when you've done something that still doesn't change the fact that you're all in industry X doing activity Y, but you've taken a leapfrog ahead of them, right? So maybe you've invented some type of new manufacturing process and you now have a 20% cost advantage versus everyone else. Maybe you have, you were the first person to make the plant that allows you to do large screen LCDs, and everyone else is still on small screen LCDs. And now you have possibly some type of sustainable advantage, noting that, I mean, nothing's ever sustainable in a free market society, right? Like, your competitive advantage always erodes if you don't do something about it. So, whereas if I was using the TV example, the incremental innovation is you go and buy a new TV and you look at the Sonys and you look at the Samsungs, you look at the LGs, and it's all 100 different features. And this has HDR, 4K, luminous, and the other guy. Okay, I am back. Okay. No, it's not the stream. It's actually me. For some reason, my streaming software shut down and my computer turned off. So that was interesting. So my screen just went blank. So I rebooted. I am back, and sorry for that brief interruption. So what I was saying is, what I would try and give an example, and other people might disagree with me, between incremental innovation and sustaining innovation. Let's say we're talking about flat screen TVs. The incremental innovation are all the hundreds of little features that everyone builds in, and it makes it confusing when you're trying to buy a TV, right? Because someone has QLED and someone has side lighting and backlighting and Android integration, or a higher frame rate, or different picture modes, and all those are fine. And I mean, I think basically if you weren't doing those things, you're kind of out of business, right? Like it's impossible. Like if Samsung and LG were doing dozens of incremental innovations a year, and Sony was saying, no, our TVs, we're going to sell you the best TV of 2017, no one was going to buy a Sony. Maybe in that context, a sustaining innovation is LG being the first to get to OLEDs and really solidified its position for a few years, and they got them out first. They still, I think, have the largest variety of OLEDs and the largest variety of screen sizes on OLEDs at the best price for OLEDs. And there where they've taken some type of advantage. It hasn't changed the fundamentals of the industry, right? Like it hasn't, because you still go to a big box retailer and you still have the same XYZ competitors selling TVs, and you still kind of buy them as a consumer, and eventually the others are going to catch up, right? It's not going to hold you. It's not going to hold you forever. It's going to the others will catch up, but I think it's something more than the incremental innovation. And I say all this with a question mark. I think that's how I interpret it, but I agree these are the two hardest ones to separate. Someone mentioned the iPhone, and the iPhone, I don't think, is either one of these two. I think the iPhone is a radical innovation because it is both a very different technological approach, right? Like we all now think it's normal that it's a touchscreen, right, and no keyboard and apps and app stores and all these things. But I mean, all this stuff was shocking when the iPhone came out. And it absolutely changed where value is being created, the relationship between the parties in the industry, and so on, right? I mean, Apple really came out of left field for people, and whole new business models came out of this. The App Store as a business model really was developed with the iPhone. And so I don't see that as being either sustaining or incremental. I think that's a classic radical innovation. I think it's a radical innovation as opposed to a disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation has a kind of more specific approach. It also changes perhaps the dynamics between the parties. But as has been promoted by Clayton Christensen for a very long time, and it's part, I think, of the startup and venture capital canon now, this concept, that disruptive innovation, someone comes and starts eating away at your worst customers, your lowest paying, your least profitable, and it's a very specific way to attack a incumbent, because the incumbent, and primarily, I mean, this is not exactly right, but primarily it's through a cost reduction, which may or may not come with a complexity reduction, right? Sometimes the cost reduction comes because you have fewer features, you've eliminated complexity, and because you've eliminated complexity, you can then reduce the cost. So a very classic disruptive innovation. I'm not going to tell the mini mill story because people have been discussing this for years, but was Google Docs. Google Docs was disruptive innovation aimed at the Microsoft Office suite. Microsoft Office suite was and is extremely capable, has lots of features. Like if you think about Excel, Excel has an absolutely staggering number of features designed for the power user or the superpower user, like even features that maybe 1/10 of 1% of users use. And those features have been built over decades. I mean, you can run mini programming environments in Excel. And Google Spreadsheets launches, and of course the obvious thing to say is like, oh, I can't do my Monte Carlo modeling in Google Spreadsheets version 1. It's true, you can't. You couldn't. But you know what? Across the broad users of Excel, what the most common usage case is, it's to keep a list. That's actually, which is weird, right? I'm a power user of Excel. I used to be a management consultant. I can do many things in Excel. But I am very atypical of an Excel user. The classic Excel user wants to keep a list of things. Well, guess what? Does Google Spreadsheets version 1 allow you to keep a list? Yes. In fact, because it's online and networked, and you can share it with your friends, it's arguably a better way to keep a list than a standalone Excel on your PC. And then it came with the exciting price of free. Right? So here you have a product that is a cash cow for Microsoft, one of the main pillars on which Microsoft is built. And it's a very smart attack. I mean, it's good for Google and for Gmail and for Google's position in and of itself, but it's also a nice and smart attack against an established incumbent competitor, because you can't really go make Excel free, right? Because then you just destroy your own margins. But then you have Google Sheets getting better every time, and it starts to eat you up from below. It's the story of the mini mills. Now, it's interesting because guess what? All the guys at Microsoft have also read Clayton Christensen's books and, of course, understood what was happening from the beginning. And Google Docs had a good run for a while, but eventually, because the only thing you can do is, as an incumbent, is go fight on that territory as well. You see how Microsoft has responded. They made their own version of this. They changed their pricing, and they merged it with their desktop version, right? So you can now get a license. Like at the university, we're still on Microsoft because they gave a very appealing license on both the desktop software and the cloud-based versions, and sync them together and so on. And so, yes, it's annoying for, I'm sure, Microsoft having to do all these things, but they've actually, I think, fought Google now to a draw on this. And I think the period where Google was taking share in Office applications. I don't know if it stopped, but it slowed down dramatically. But that's a classic disruptive innovation. Now, there's a question there about Bitcoin, which I might hold that question until we do the other ones, and then we'll come back to it. Cryptocurrencies. Would you say cryptocurrencies themselves are the key innovations that masses will use, or are we still waiting for the big innovations in the everyday space that will be made possible with cryptocurrencies, for example, micropayments, streaming money, other second layer solutions, DAO, etc.? Well, I mean, I think as we are now, we do not have a mass market cryptocurrency product. We're early adopter-ish. So will the trading, holding, usage case of Bitcoin be the mass product? I don't know. Will there be something built on top of it that has more retail usage? Yeah, maybe. Maybe. And the reason I say these things as maybes, because I'm not really answering the innovation question, but I get asked this question a lot. Linux, for a long time, Linux on the desktop was going to succeed. And of course it never did. And here we are in 2020, 20 years later after we've been hearing about Linux on the desktop, and everyone's running OS X or Windows, just like everyone was running OS X or Windows 20 years ago. Not OS X. We're still running on the desktop the same two operating systems and the same two companies we were running 20 years ago. But Linux, so if you measure Linux by how many retail users are using Linux, I don't know, almost nobody. On the other hand, Linux has gone everywhere, right? Like most servers are running on Linux. Linux underpins parts of OS X. Linux underpins part of your operating systems on cell phones. And so people aren't running Linux directly, but the number of the majority of the world's computational cycles, I believe, might be on Linux now. And so it's one of those interesting questions that I don't know the answer to when it comes to Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. Will success look like every single person, or 50% of people are going to be will have a Bitcoin wallet and be doing something with Bitcoin? And by Bitcoin, it could be Zcash, Ethereum, whatever, right? Will people be day-to-day using this topic? Or will the systems that people use cryptocurrencies, blockchains, DLTs in the background to do things that they need to do? And there's actually a big market share for these technologies, but not front-end consumer. And I don't know. I can argue the case either way, but since this is not the topic of today's discussion, I'll just leave it as I don't know. But we'll come back. We'll come back to when we answer the question of what Bitcoin might be. All right. Can we consider the coming of cryptocurrency to our current trading world as a kind of innovation, or as a coding, decoding, encoding, etc. of currency? I don't know what the second part of the question means, but I will say what the first part of the question I think is relevant. When you think about the cryptocurrency ecosystem, you have to ask yourself, what type of innovation is this? Well, what part of the ecosystem are we talking about? And versus what industry are we talking about? So, for example, if you said, is Bitcoin trading an XYZ innovation? Well, Bitcoin, there's no feature of Bitcoin called trading. I've looked in the blockchain. There's no trading in Bitcoin specifically, right? There are some decentralized exchanges built on second and third layer platforms, but Bitcoin does not have trading, right? There are companies that trade Bitcoin for fiat running exchange software. Are those companies in and of themselves some type of radical innovation? No, I don't think so. Disruptive? No, sort of, maybe. But they kind of look like exchanges that we've had for a long time and a whole bunch of other assets. So what you're asking, where you apply the question, and versus which industry you apply the question to, can give you different answers. And I'll hold that again for when I come back to this topic. So I think I had another two here. All right. With governments and central banks thinking about national digital currencies, or CBDCs, it looks like we're moving on to the vertical part of the S-curve. Do you agree? Yeah, I think we're at the bottom of the vertical part of the S-curve. We're not in this part yet. We're in the where it starts to bend a little bit, because it's like people thinking about how they're going to get on the S-curve. They haven't really hit the gas and they're going up the S-curve, but they're intrigued. I think that's where we are, system-wide. Could blockchain itself be disrupted by other distributed ledger technologies such as DAGs, quantum computing, etc.? Well, sure. I certainly am not going to take a position that any particular technology is the one true, final, and holy technology and will never change. Like that, for sure, it can happen. Do you think it's possible that a coin might replace Bitcoin or Ethereum on the number one or number two spot of coin market cap? That's a very specific question. Being first mover isn't always an advantage. Google wasn't the first search engine. Facebook not the first social media platform. If not, what would need to happen? Could. I mean, it's not easy, but it could. Bitcoin has some pretty serious network effects at this point in that specific context of how people are making coins. And so people have thrown several thousand coins at Bitcoin, and nobody's displaced it at the number one spot at coin market cap yet. But could happen. Someone could find something better, more appealing. But we're not there yet. It hasn't happened yet. So let's come to the core question, because we have a couple of other questions here that are not related to the topic. So I'd like to come back to the question that showed up in the chat, and I think is the difficult question in this session, the one that I'm not going to give one answer to. But if you said, Antonis, you can only pick one of the four types of innovation, what's Bitcoin? I would say it's a radical innovation. It's clearly not incremental, and it's clearly not sustaining, because those work within a certain industry structure, value chain, supply chain, market ecosystem. So we're really left between disruptive and radical. The argument to say it's disruptive and not radical is to go, I think, look at specific usage cases like what people were talking about in 2013, 2014. Oh, look, remittances cost this much. And Bitcoin can do it cheaper. Merchant processing costs this much, and Bitcoin can do it less expensively. And I think in that context, that might be true, sort of. It's interesting because even in that context, you discover that most of the costs aren't in the technology. Like the reason remittances aren't expensive isn't primarily because SWIFT is very expensive to run. It's because you need anti-money laundering and know your customer, and that customer base also sometimes needs to come to a physical branch, and you have to pay for the physical branch. So it's not, even that story is a little muddied from what I think people thought initially. But obviously that's not what all of what Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or what blockchains are, right? That there's programmability. There's quote-unquote digital gold. There's second layers. There's side chains. There's notarization. There's attestation. It looks like something very, very different. It doesn't look like a disruption at the bottom of an existing product category. And like we said at the beginning, what is it? Right, at the regulatory chapter, what is it? Depending on who's looking at Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or DLT as a whole, right? Everyone sees a different thing. But to me, that's why it's a radical innovation. If it was a disruptive innovation, the classic Clayton Christian example of mini mills. They came, they took the least expensive, least profitable steel products. He often uses the example of Toyota. They came in the 70s, made really junky cars for people with a lot of money in the United States, but they were cheap. Nobody thought to themselves, yeah, Toyota makes cars, but they're also doing banking. Toyota makes cars, but they also make chocolates. Mini mills make steel, but they're also disrupting JCPenney. Right? These types of complete shakeup of the system are radical innovations. I think Bitcoin itself is a radical innovation. And it's one of those that, it's arguably more, I think that's right, it's more radical than, let's say, if you say an iPhone's a radical innovation. It is. But it's still recognizable as a phone, and you've moved around the ecosystem, and you've created new things like app stores or what have you, but it's still a phone. Bitcoin is something closer to the internet, right? Like Linux, a foundational technology, and so like 50 other things are going to get built on top of it. So yes, it itself is a radical innovation. But a lot of the things you will see in the ecosystem aren't Bitcoin. They're another layer on Bitcoin. They're Ethereum. They're Zcash. They're Bitcoin Cash. They're Monero. They're Coinbase. They are Bitfury, etc., 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 etc. And each one of those things came into being because Bitcoin existed. And each one of those things then needs to be analyzed separately, because each of those things applies to a certain industry. Some of them apply to the cryptocurrency industry, but some of them really just apply to a different industry, right? When people are saying, oh, I'm going to store my Bitcoin at a safe custodian because it's digital gold, the industry you're applying it to and doing the analysis of is gold, precious metals, investments. And there are parallels. There are parallels in how it works. It's not necessarily as radical when you're doing that. So when you take specific usage cases, when you take Bitcoin in remittances, Bitcoin in remittances is probably disruptive, not radical. Bitcoin in asset management, done through a third party, sustaining, incremental, I don't know. If we have third parties that hold precious assets for us and send us statements and charge a fee for doing that, as a business model, the business model of Zappa, when it was still in the custody business, was not a radically new business model. So any specific usage case of Bitcoin, specific cryptocurrency, specific DLT, which of course takes the token away and has a whole different set of parameters, and specific firm that operates in the space, needs to be analyzed within the industry context of which it operates. A. And B, the answer could be very different. And you have to apply the framework not just of innovation, but of if this is a good idea, if there is some point of strategic control, if this is a good business to get into, all over again for that specific application. And so my summary answer is this. Bitcoin itself, in its general context, for me is a radical innovation. Any specific application of Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, DLT, or firm in the space might be any of those four, and may or may not be a good business idea. Right? So it's one of the things that you see happen a lot. People get excited about Bitcoin or Ethereum or cryptocurrency, and it is exciting. It's very interesting, it's very unique, it's very transformational, it's radical. And then that excitement flows over to, here is my specific idea in a specific segment for a specific reason with my specific company, token, ICO, whatever. Doesn't mean that that's a good idea. It could be a terrible idea. This could be the difference between saying the internet was a very good idea, right? But your Twitter clone number 47, probably not a very good idea. Not very innovative, no point of strategic control, no reason it should exist. Even though it's in the excitement of the internet, it's not in and of itself so interesting. Now, we don't do that anymore with the internet, right? We did that in the .com bubble era, where everything that just said internet was super exciting. And people kind of shut off their brains and didn't think too much about whether or not that business at that point in time and that model was viable. I think the equivalent period for cryptocurrency was the 2017-2018 ICO boom, where, slapped the word token on it, and all of a sudden, it's super exciting. It's worth 100 million. It's worth 500 million. Everyone's going to get rich. It's a great idea. Well, leaving aside the people who are actually running a scam, most of the reasons that those didn't work is because the normal reason that most businesses, particularly startups in most areas on most topics, aren't going to work. Competition's hard. You need some type of differentiation. You need to have discovered some type of customer need. And the customer need you've discovered in blockchain for the shipping industry might have nothing to do with the reasons that Bitcoin has been successful. Right? Bitcoin was successful because it served certain latent needs that some people sort of knew they have, but on the whole, most people did not know that they had before Bitcoin. But that doesn't mean that the blockchain for X is or isn't a good idea. It has to be evaluated on its own merits. And in that same way, whether it's innovative, not innovative, what type of innovation is, also has to be evaluated on its own merits. So that's where I am on how I would classify crypto, Bitcoin, etc. in this framework. I have about 10 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about, I want to go back to disruptive innovation for a second. And I want to address the Chris Dixon blog post that I put in the reading. And I think it's very good. I think it's very correct. And it's counterintuitive to a lot of people. Generally, people will... The expectation should be that you will not recognize a disruptive innovation when it's in front of you. In general, as a human being and as a consumer. I know that's weird to say, but it's almost certainly true. You will definitely not recognize it if you are working in that industry. And you're going to say, but Antonis, like, come on, I've learned the framework, we've read the stories. We're not going to go the way the steel firms or U.S. auto manufacturers went. And unfortunately, and this applies to me, by the way, right? Like, unfortunately, probably will. Because one of the things that the reason people miss it is because in the beginning, the disruptive technology is really lousy. It's not good. It looks, like Chris Dixon said, like a toy. The classic story that everyone knows. But I'd like you to imagine yourself. You are a senior manager at IBM in the 1970s. You dominate the global technology industry. You've dominated it for decades. You have hundreds of thousands of employees. You come with a tie. You have your suit. You go, you sell to other big companies. You have very serious conversations about very serious business objectives. And then you sell them a very large mainframe that's the size of my apartment and costs a lot of money. And you have very serious top scientists, and none of this is being ironic, right? Like some of the best scientists in the world, some of the best executives in the world, some of the best engineers in the world. You go away from years and you come out with these beasts of a machine that are the size of a room and can calculate things faster than any machine has calculated before, and then you sell them to General Motors because they need them to run their factory, and millions of dollars change hands. And then you progress in your career and all of this, right? You are master of your realm. And at the same time, you have some guy like Woz, who's kind of funny looking, countercultural, working by himself, doesn't look serious by the standards of a big button-down enterprise. No, it's just like some... And he's making this thing that looks Mickey Mouse. Right? It has almost no computational power. It's arts and crafts he's done in his garage. It has some ridiculous monitor. It has like wood around it. I mean, like the whole thing looks like a joke. Looks like, as Chris Dixon says, a toy. Looks like something that if you're a senior IBM executive, I don't know, that's cute. Or you might actually say that this is bad. But let's say you're a little bit more advanced. Oh, that's super cute. Maybe I'll get one of those for my kids to play around with. What does this have to do in any way with these enterprise-grade, super multi-million-dollar machines that my whole sales, business, engineering infrastructure sells to other big organizations, and then we spend years getting them to work with their ERP systems and their factories and their software? Nothing. One is a major part of industry, and the other thing is like some goofy person's toy. And if you said that in 1977, it's kind of right. And by 1987, your fate has already been sealed. You've missed the biggest innovation in your field for decades. But you didn't miss it. It was right in front of you the whole time. You saw it. And then you saw it when Bill Gates came and said, had his famous operating system discussion. And you missed it again. Okay, this is not a big deal. It's fine. And IBM's mistakes here, but I don't blame them for it. I don't blame IBM for mistakes. Lead to ultimately Microsoft, Intel, Apple turning into companies, and turning into big companies, and turning into big and valuable companies with better strategic control of their ecosystem than IBM has of its. And those companies now are, I don't know, $2.5 trillion in value, something like that. Don't get me wrong, IBM is still a big, successful business. They sell a lot of things to enterprises. They still sell mainframes, and a bunch of other things. But they have had nowhere near the economic and return of capital success that these other companies had. And it was right there, right in front of them the whole time. And it always looks that way, right? And so part of the reason that Chris Dixon blog post for me resonates is that some of the Clayton Christensen discussions make it seem easier that you could pick it up, even though he said, because Clayton Christensen says, well, you know what's going on, but your economic model, the rational economic model to not chase the unprofitable customer, or less profitable customer, is going to push the managers away from what's going on, right? That's the mini mills discussion. That's the Toyota discussion. And that's true. But that's not the whole story. Because I think if you look at the mini mills discussion, you could say, okay, I get it. If someone comes and, I'm making steel or I'm making whatever my equivalent thing is, someone is now taking my bad customers, but in fact my customers, then I might know that disruptive innovation is happening and it's happening to me and maybe I should take steps. Chris Dixon framework of the next big thing looks like a toy is a step beyond that. Because Wozniak and Jobs and Bill Gates in the late 70s and early 80s were not taking any of IBM's customers. Right? They weren't pulling away anyone who was otherwise going to spend $3,000 with IBM. They looked like hobbyists. They looked like craftsmen. They looked like they were playing around with a toy. And interestingly, you see a lot of people who are now trying to look further ahead use this framework. The same thing happened with cryptocurrency. Well, what's the framework they look at? What are kind of tech-savvy, smart people messing around with for fun? Messing around with in their garage, doing something as a hobby, doing something as a toy. And cryptocurrency had that feel. Still does to some degree. What else do people look at? Drones, right? People are messing around with drones. Yeah, that makes sense. Right? And so things that I'm not saying that's true now, right? Like drones are fully into the business industrial complex. It's not. No one's going to say drones are toys. Today, drones were toys 5-10 years ago, though. And so if you're asking yourself where today is the new disruptive thing? The simple answer is who is offering your cheapest products. Easier, cheaper, less complex, a tenth the price, 10 times the speed, whatever. But the more complicated answer, the more radical answer, the one where you'll see the real breakthroughs, the things that will turn into disruptive technologies in a few years, or maybe even be radical innovations, don't look anything like your industry. I try to think about this as a university. Am I particularly worried about other universities? No, I mean normal amount of worried, right? Like every university wants to have more students and more research funding and be selected, and right, like everyone wants to be popular. And all universities do that, and all universities look around at every other university, and it's primarily incremental innovation, maybe a little bit of sustaining innovation, but primarily incremental. Right? The university model doesn't change that much month to month. So what are the things that could be radically disruptive to universities? Well, they don't look anything like universities. It's not someone who's saying, I'm offering a bachelor's of business administration and I'm offering it at half the price. I'm not worried about that. That's within the sustaining incremental innovations. Somewhere there's something that is a blind spot for me. That today I'd be like, oh, that's cute. That's fun that people are doing that. And someday it will address some of the student needs that universities have. And people were worried that it was going to be MOOCs. And that does not appear to be MOOCs. Even though we're doing a MOOC right now, it turns out the people who offer the most MOOCs are in fact the universities. So that was interesting. It looked, universities for a little while were a little bit scared about MOOCs, but it turns out universities offer MOOCs as opposed to not universities as a general rule. But it's hard. So I try and think about this, but my concern remains that I won't see it when it's there, because it will look toy-like, not like all the theory and structure and prestige of a university. And then there's this weird little thing. And like, okay, that's fine. Someone's messing around. And you will never think that 10 years later, that might be the tsunami that comes and finds you. And so I will leave you with that thought for today, that disruptive and radical innovation can be very hard to spot in practice. You have to fight all your natural instincts. It is easy when you're writing a business book to spot it in hindsight. It's easy to sit there in 1995 and say, hey, look, Toyota became a very successful company, and here's how they did it. But you don't get any points for spotting things in hindsight. You get points for spotting things before they happen. And so that's the challenge. I think the sustaining and incremental innovations you will see, they're there. But how you can pick up on radical or disruptive innovation, either because you want to engage in it, or because you want to protect and respond correctly because you're an incumbent, that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of mental flexibility. And you have to somehow take your industry sector blinders off, because you for sure have them. You don't know you have them, or you don't know how tight they are, but they're there, just like I have them, just like everyone has them. So that's my final thought for today. Okay, everyone, as always in these times, please stay safe. We will be back next week, and hope everyone is well.